All right, so I know I just asked this, but how are y'all now? Are we pumped? I know it's after lunch or whatever. Maybe y'all got the itis, but we're gonna bring some energy. Okay, no one's falling asleep.
What's that?
So as I said before, my name is Sernah. I'm an intern with Universities Allied for Essential Medicines, and we are a global grassroots network of students, activists, health professionals, and lawyers who are just seeking to change the current world of unaffordable medications through changing R&D and making a system that is more needs-driven. And so as Peter said, we will be talking today about intersectionality. And I want to ask first, who in this room is familiar with that term, intersectionality? Cool, a good amount, which is what I like. So we're going to be discussing how that plays into building movements and building power. So we're going to take a step back from all the jargon-heavy conversations that we've had today, the usual conversations that we have at these conferences, and really look at the kind of movements that we want to make. Whose stories are we including? Who do they empower? Who do they leave out? How wide is their scope? As organizers working for affordable medications, we must realize that health justice encompasses so many things. It encompasses gender justice, racial justice, labor justice, criminal justice, and that's just to name a few. So we're going to continue to dive into this, but first I want to introduce our panel of amazing people. So these are not your usual access to medicines experts, but there are some amazing organizers who know a lot about a lot of things, and I really am excited to hear how their identity and their work influences how they seek to build power. So first, we have Ola Ojewumi. Ola is a writer and a community organizer based in Washington, D.C. She is the founder of the global education nonprofit ProjectASCEND, the Clinton Global Initiative, MTV, Intel, Glamour Magazine, and the Huffington Post have all praised her charitable initiatives. She's a graduate of the University of Maryland College Park and a champion for higher education in marginalized communities. Please give her a warm round of applause. In the stunning turquoise, we have Jane Dimnwaobi. She's currently at a fellowship at Global Giving, an international fundraising platform where she empowers nonprofits to enact change in their communities. She has experience as a campus organizer with the Enough Project, a canvasser with Doctors Without Borders, and a former intern at Corporate Accountability International. The main questions that Jane attempts to answer surround bottom-up international aid, migrant and refugee rights, and grassroots international solidarity. Jane wholly believes in the power of organizing in any field and values incorporating new themes, whether health or criminal justice, into her understanding of international human rights. Again, one more round of applause. Y'all see how I'm keeping you awake with that, right? Okay. And last but very certainly not least, we have Reginald Brown. Reginald Brown is a longtime vocal leader and now board member. Vocal, which stands for Voices of Community Activists and Leaders, New York, is a statewide grassroots membership organization that builds power among low-income people affected by HIV/AIDS, hepatitis C, the drug war, homelessness, and mass incarceration in order to create healthy and just communities. They accomplish this through community organizing, leadership development, public education, direct services, participatory research, and direct action. One more time, move those hands. All right, so we are going to dive right in. First, I would like to get any questions that y'all preemptively would like to have answered. Does anybody have any question now that we can answer throughout the panel? Notes that there will also be a short time for Q&A at the end. Perfect.
You know what I would like to ask first is I saw a lot of people raise their hands about that, about intersectionality. I would like to hear what a couple of you think of that, because that word means a whole lot of different things. I really kind of like to get a feeling of what we're going on here. Does that resonate with you all?
Fine with me. So of the 30-odd people who raised their hands, we're going to need at least 2 brave volunteers. In the back.
So my
Your name, please?
Hi, I'm Leah. I'm an intern at Public Citizen, and my impression of intersectionality is that basically parts of your identity, so your gender, your race, your sexuality, based on if you have a minority status in any one of those, they all kind of intersect together to kind of multiply the disadvantages that you have within society, and or advantages. I guess it kind of goes both ways, but just that it's not just about what race you are or what gender you are, that all of those things can come together and give you a different profile within the world.
Great definition. I think that summed a lot of it up. Anybody else? All right, well, that's our very first question for y'all. So what is your definition of intersectionality, and how do you see it at work in your world?
So Kimberly Crenshaw, famous feminist and author, and I guess PhD researcher. She is the one that created a term intersectionality, and we've often misused it. So it's not about the multiplication of identities that you have and how oppressed you are based on that. It is how differently you are treated. Can you hear this? Or okay, it's how differently you are treated based upon the intersections of your identity. So, for example, if you are white and a female, you may be oppressed and in a minority status, but you also have the privilege of being white and being in certain spaces. So I think we should really cling to Kimberly Crenshaw's definition of intersectionality because it is the actual definition.
Thank you. I definitely want to echo everything Ola said because in the last few years, people have definitely created their own definition of intersectionality, which is important to understand it relative to yourself, but have diverted from Kimberly Crenshaw's intention when she publicized the term. But for me, kind of now that we have that recognition, for me, intersectionality is the recognition of layered experiences, which is very similar to what we've already talked about. And also, I always want to be explicit that it's not about competition. So when people talk about intersectionality, they're saying, I'm this, but I'm also this. And sometimes when the tone isn't correct, the conversation can kind of veer towards, well, I experienced this, so I'm worse off than you are. And that's not what I think the focus should be. So I always just want to point out that people's conditions in societies change as privilege kind of is in flux, because at certain times there's things that certain things in society that would put you above somebody else, but that's not always the case. And as those things are in flux, as our identities are in flux, we all have to acknowledge that and continue to keep ourselves aware. So yeah, definitely that it's not a competition. It's not static.
Right, it's not a competition, it's not static, and it's also something that changes over time. For example, there are intersectional things that I have, but I have to be aware of my privilege as a male. Even though I am queer, even though I have AIDS, even though I have depression, as a man, I have to be careful that just because I have all of these other things going on, that I also have privilege that I have to be aware of. And that's on me to be aware of that.
Thank you so much for that. I just wanted to comment with one of my favorite Kimberly Crenshaw quotes. Intersectionality is not primarily about identity. Rather, it is about how structures make certain identities the consequence of the vehicle for vulnerability. And so in that way, it just really echoes everything that they said in the sense that our identity is not the primary thing that matters, but rather how our identities exist within certain structures. So how do y'all as organizers or as people who've been involved in different movements and campaigns, how do y'all see intersectionality affect the people who you seek to empower?
I work mainly in the disability rights movement. And so for decades, the disability rights movement has been predominantly white, even though that does not reflect the actual population of people with disabilities. So oftentimes activists are discouraged in talking about race. That's the big no-no. You think you'll lose support from whomever you're speaking to, whether it be an elected official or someone who's interested in joining your campaign or joining your organization. But it's something personally I bring up in meetings with politicians, meetings with students, in every part of my work, and not just race. Race goes beyond that. It goes to ethnicity and ethnic heritage. As a person of color from a foreign background, I am treated differently, And there's a duality in the Black immigrant experience and the Black American experience that I have lived through, because though I speak with an American accent, though I was born in the United States, there is not a week that I'm not asked where I was really where I'm really from, or where I was born. So I make it a point to be inclusive of culture, be inclusive of heritage, and being inclusive of race. Oh, one last thing, sorry. If you notice within the disability rights movement as of now, particularly with attempts to repeal the Affordable Care Act, there's a reason that you see white bodies being dragged out of congressional offices. How sympathetic would it be for a Black disabled person to be carried out by the police? It would be. People view disability in an ableist lens, that everyone's just going to feel sorry for you, and that your race is somehow erased when you sit in a wheelchair or use crutches. No, it's not. There's a reason often disabled protesters don't tend to be people of color, because our interactions with the police are different. I may not survive police custody, but you will. And to be arrested as a Black person, being dragged out of a congressional office for what is seen as an entitlement, it wouldn't have garnered the same support and pushback as if it was a white person with a disability. So it's important to recognize the intersection of that identity.
To answer Sernah's question of how intersectionality has affected my work, it's important for me to talk about two professional experiences that I've had thus far. So when I was as an undergrad, I interned with Corporate Accountability International with their water campaign. So the name gives it away. Like, they are really about people organizing and moving and kind of pressuring governments to move away from taking corporate funds and general grassroots empowerment that I think people in this room would echo. And so as a water intern, right after the Flint water crisis, I learned that when you're looking at private companies buying out cities' pipes and then choosing where water comes from, that will negatively affect people of color in that community. No matter what deal was made, no matter if it's a private partnership or a public-private, ultimately, when you're hiking up prices, people who can't afford to pay tend to be people of color, specifically Black and brown people in Michigan and in Pennsylvania, which were the two cities I researched. So I didn't come in there thinking that water was specifically a racial issue, but after the Flint water crisis, and then during my research, I realized that in every city that this came up, in every city that water access was a question, oppression in the form of physical inaccess to water, pollution, receiving polluted water, whether lead or other chemicals, was the effect. So I think that also seeing the organization work on food justice, which is basically counteracting fast food chains, buying out neighborhoods and forcing people in poor neighborhoods to eat in what they call food deserts, where you only have certain types of fast food available, also tends to affect Black and brown people. And same thing with climate. Who lives in the communities that are being flooded when nobody's funding disaster mitigation techniques? Black and brown people. So I came into this internship looking for organizing experience, understanding a lot about the world, but then I left realizing that no matter what aspect I started researching, it always came back to communities with less access to resources, specifically financial, and those are Black and brown populations. And I remember thinking, like, wow, I'm never going to get away from this idea of intersectionality. And even today, I haven't gotten away from it. Now I work at Global Giving, which is a fundraising platform. And what we do is give people around the world really a place to come together, come up with an idea, a project, and then post that on a platform, on a website with a group that has a global reach. So they have the opportunity to reach people that they never would have otherwise. And it really takes away the idea of, being in the U.S. and being like, I know what people in Cambodia need. Instead, you give people in Cambodia a website to tell their own stories, which is something we talked about earlier, and publicize those stories in a way that they wouldn't have before, and then receive donors or receive connections or build their networks to then empower their project. So when you kind of dig into anything long enough, you realize that it's never just a surface layer. So I've kind of spent the last 4 years realizing that intersectionality is non-negotiable. So it's a consistent learning process, and I've definitely seen that no matter what field I go into, it's always about bringing it back to the people who are mostly separated from, I don't know, I guess, the resources that we talk about. Like, who's really experiencing the things? How do we bring it back to them? So, I don't know, that's what I've learned.
And speaking of people who are experiencing things, Greg Gonzalez mentioned the film Look Back in Anger. I don't know if any of you saw that. It's about the early history of ACT UP. I saw that movie, and it was very, very impressive. But I was also very, very angry because in that maybe hour and a half movie, there was one black person, and if you blinked, you would have missed them, and the person did not speak. That completely erased me. I was there then. There are others like me there then. But where's our story? We were not part of that narrative. I was given 2 years to live in 1986. That was 32 years ago. I'm still here. But I realized that I'm here so that people who look like me, I can say to them, hey, I have AIDS. This is what HIV looks like. It's okay. But if you don't see somebody that looks like me, you would look at that film and say, well, that's not us. And that's one of the narratives that's affecting the black population now. It's not, it was a gay disease. It was their disease. Because the people that look like us weren't affected. However, the people who are most inordinately affected right now are black men between the ages of 13 and about 30. It's estimated that one half of people will be HIV positive, and that's not necessary. That's not necessary. So my thing is I have to be a living example to deal with the stigma. HIV, stigma and fear will kill you is more deadly than HIV.
To speak on the, what he's speaking on is the erasure of identity in civil service or public service or whatever you want to call it, social justice. That's the right term. I will say that with people with disabilities, when I was growing up, the only thing I knew about people with disabilities in terms of equal rights movements was a one paragraph in world history class about the Americans with Disabilities Act that was birthed in my year. I mean, by show of hands, how many people know that they're about disability history? Wow, this is more than most crowds. And I will say the erasure, it's apparent in social justice movements, particularly Black Lives Matter, specifically with police brutality, when 50% of those killed by the police are people with disabilities. Can you believe that? Half. You wouldn't know that based on the viral videos. Are the forums, are cable news a commentary on it? We are completely erased. Even when it comes to gender justice, you are more likely to be in a domestic violence relationship than if you are a disabled woman. And if you're a disabled woman of color, that number increases. You are more likely to be raped or sexually assaulted as a disabled woman than an able-bodied woman. Yet this campaign, sexual assault, all these campaigns against campus sexual assault, Me Too, all of it, does it feature one disabled woman or one disabled person, period? And it goes beyond that. Disabled people aren't seen in any aspect of society. Look on entertainment. If there's a disabled character in in a movie or a television show, that person isn't even disabled. There are actual disabled actors out here who can't get roles playing themselves. Maysoon Saeed, she is a disabled woman of color who's a comedian, and she says if a person in a wheelchair cannot play Beyonce, then Beyonce can't play a person in a wheelchair. And the intersection of, in terms of affordable medicines, the mental health, this pro-mental health movement, anti-suicide movement, People with disabilities are encouraged to commit suicide. Because who on earth would want to be disabled? I've heard it as a wheelchair user. Oh, I just kill myself if I was ever in a wheelchair. So in this movement to stop people from killing themselves, people with disabilities are pushed away from mental health services. I don't know if anyone remembers this story last year where there was a huge celebration of this young 16-year-old girl who had decided to kill herself, who had a disability. Hundreds of people came out to a prom to celebrate her decision. Imagine people celebrating a disabled young girl saying her life is worthless and not worth living and not worth fighting through every day. That is the type of stuff that pisses me off. That's why visibility is so important and erasure needs to be stopped. Because there are far too many people with disabilities who are activists, who are entertainers, and who bring to light these experiences, whether it's through humor, television, social justice, whatever, and no one sees us. We are the invisible, but the largest, statistically, the largest minority in the United States.
Thank you. So this question is specifically for Ola and Reginald, mainly just because the stories you both gave. How do you or your organization serve people at the intersection of marginalized identities? And how, in addition to how do you serve them, how do you make their stories heard? How do you make them seen?
I have privilege that I'm able to go out to these demonstrations and things. I'm on disability and I have a pension. I can do this. There's some of our members who aren't able to do this. So what I will do is I will talk to them and ask them if I can share their stories, and I will try to involve them as much as possible. But this is something that. I grapple with that. How can I best do that? Because like I said, I have to recognize my privilege. But as much as possible, I try to encourage them, and I let them know. It's like the sister in the back said, don't ever discount your story. Your story is your most important act and your most valuable asset. Even if you don't think it is, somebody needs to hear your story. Somebody needs to hear your story, so don't deprive them of that story. So what I do is I talk to them. I say, how can I help you? I don't say this is what you need. What do you need from me? How can I help you? And then I try to present their case. If they're not able, if they're able to come, then I give them all the support that they need to say, come on, you can do it. I encourage them. I encourage people to find their own voice. I encourage them. I say, you can do it. Sometimes when I'm invited to speak something, I will bring someone else along and say, here, you do it. Just to train them. Because the point is, that's how I got trained. And that's how I have to pass that on.
I started my nonprofit when I was 19 with a $500 college. Thank you.
Whoa. Whoa.
What were y'all doing at 19?
Yeah, right.
It was with the help of a scholarship refund check. So my organization was eventually discovered by MTV, and so in less than 3 months, we flipped 500 and turned it into 5,000 because of them. And our organization provides college scholarships to disabled youth. The way we do this along the intersections of race and disability is we limit it specifically to the Washington, D.C. area. And the D.C. metro area houses the richest black population in the United States. So there's a level of diversity in colleges here, and that's why we limit it to just this area. And so our scholarship recipients don't just receive a check and that's it. They're actually required to participate in a lobby day on the Hill where they bring their stories to politicians. For example, for our second class of ProjectASCEND scholars, we brought them to the White House to meet with President Obama's advisor on disability. They got to sit with her for an hour and discuss important policy issues that impact them. They got to take pictures in front of the West Wing. And last year, one of the classes of ProjectASCEND scholars got to meet with House Minority Whip Congressman Steny Hoyer to discuss the same things, but with a different class of scholarship recipients. And they not all of them are people of color. The vast majority of scholars are people of color, and that's how we champion for them. And also, I do a lot of writing. I think anyone can be a writer, in my opinion. Just spit your soul out on a piece of paper. and it's not as hard to get published because there are mediums like Mick, or Mike.com, or Medium.com, where you can self-publish and your article can go viral. So I bring these stories to light, and I try to use humor and entertainment as a way. So I've been published by CNN.com, HuffPo, Glamour, and for Glamour magazine, I wrote. Okay, please don't laugh. One of my friends called me like the disabled Beyonce. So I took that story and I turned it into a disabled hiring guide using Beyonce's lyrics, and Glamour magazine picked it up.
Right.
And
That's how you do it.
Right.
And so Beyonce's manager read it before it went live. So I'm just like, oh my God, if I could just touch the hem of her garment, my life would be so lit. But
Please.
one of my favorite lyrics is from her Lemonade album. And it's like, when you hurt me, you hurt yourself. Disabled people are innovators and game changers. We've had a disabled president. There are so many people you don't know who are hiding disabilities. Sojourner Truth was a disabled woman. Fannie Lou Hamer was a disabled woman. Harriet Tubman was a disabled woman. FDR, President of the United States, was a disabled man who made great efforts to hide his wheelchair. But he made the White House accessible to him.
Yep.
So you have all these brilliant people with disabilities, but because you only look at these mobility devices or what they can't do, you're missing what they can. And disabled, for me, there's something about Black disabled girls, like we are just a whole nother level of fly, because we have to deal with the triple-headed monster of racism, sexism, and ableism. I can never tell if someone's mistreating me because of either or. Even weird things, like I'm a part-time wheelchair user. I survived a heart and kidney transplant when I was 11, and I have very weak muscles, so I use my wheelchair part-time when I need it. But the way that I am sexually harassed when I'm in my wheelchair, it's a completely different story. I get to walk two worlds. One where I appear able-bodied, and then the second where I appear disabled. And so street harassment for women with disabilities. I've had men chase me. This isn't because I'm beautiful or anything, but it's because there's a rape complex. For women with disabilities, we appear more vulnerable. So we tend to attract rapists or people who are want to be in control of you. I will have homeless men hit on me, Coach bag, briefcase, whatever, and they still think they have a chance. And it's like, no. But it's the action of being able to control and manipulate a woman with a disability.
So in this room, we have a bunch of people who are organizers on things from access to medicine, expanding healthcare, again, human rights. We have a myriad of different issues. But one thing that all of our platforms should seek to do is be inclusive. As organizers, how do we create platforms that work from the bottom up rather than top down? In other words, how do we empower those who may experience oppression or hardship at greater levels than we do, especially when we are trying to create national or broad campaigns?
My question is there anyone here of trans experience? I didn't think so. That's one thing that I was wondering why that's not been represented. Because that's an organization that those people with trans experience are also left out. How about the sex workers? See, these are the people that are on the margins of the margins. Those are the people that I go after. Those are the people that I make an effort to include. Not only because I'm part of a margin, but because they are people also, and they're organizers. And some of the organizers I know that have trans experience and sex workers are some of the kick-ass organizers you ever want to be around. And they're real. But the thing is, and they will be there for us. That's the point. They will show up for us. But sometimes when they show up, just like some of the reactions, like I said, oh, sex worker, trans experience. Come on, people, we're organized. We're organizing people. So we have to get over that. So that's what I do. I go out and recruit and encourage those that are the margins of the margins. And what about anybody in here formerly incarcerated? Okay, all right, okay. And one of the things that Vocal New York does we have people who are formerly incarcerated, because our people, our stories, as I'm telling you, are our most important asset. You know why we're as successful as we are? Because everybody is directly affected by one or more of the issues that we do. In our 20 years, we have at least one legislative win locally or statewide, because we don't give up. We don't have a choice to give up. So that's how I deal with making sure that all people are represented.
I just wanted to add one comment for everybody in the room, but I would like everyone to picture, either during or after the panel, what health justice looks like for somebody who is a sex worker, somebody who has a trans experience.
So I think the biggest lesson that I've learned working with groups, working as a canvasser with different nonprofits that are always dealing with limited funding, always, is give people your money. Like, at a certain point, it's really just about the privilege to sit in a room like this and talk about what we're talking about. A lot of people have to go to work and they have to do this and they have to do that, and they're obligated by intersecting identities or being on the margins, and they can't show up and have these conversations. But at the same time, we can't always be having them for the people that are experiencing the issues. So when money is kind of the crux of access, it's really important to fundraise and to fund people's activities, because to me, that's always been the most effective outcome. And in other ways, I've seen nonprofits stretch money in amazing ways. Like, they will, like what you said, like they'll do a lot with $500 and they turn it into something else. And it's really just about giving them that opportunity, like giving individuals that opportunity, giving small committees that opportunity, rather than making decisions that people would have come to themselves.
The three things: criticize, call out, and create change. I think the way that I keep my organization and my political efforts diverse is by outing the elephant in the room. I am openly critical when I see that there is a majority white panel at a feminist event. I'm like, where I will say, I'll get on the mic, where are the people of color? Where are the people with disabilities? So call out and criticize. And that'll have people think next year we should include this. I'm like, why aren't there interpreters at this event? If this is, why isn't there closed captioning at this event? Not this event in particular, but just in general.
It's an assumption. It's an assumption.
So, for example, I was a NGen fellow with American Express and Independent Sector, and I called out their lack of accessibility at their yearly conference. And the next year, it inspired a partnership with JP Morgan, where they paid for the entire conference to be accessible. So just speaking up created a partnership between a major bank and a nonprofit to make accessibility a reality. And secondly, pass the power and recognize their privilege. One of the things I do is, okay, so I'm a person of middle income. Why do I need to be speaking on this issue? Why not have my friend who is on Medicaid, someone who is actually experienced this, who's on SSDI? Don't accept every opportunity when you can pass it to someone who can make a real impact. It's hard as hell to try and be less selfish, but you gain so much from that. And in terms of, I think mentorship is really huge. You may not even realize who you're mentoring just by speaking to them, or just by maybe even your social media. For example, but what I've always told people on the boards that I've been on, in the programs that I've been a part of, stop going after the success stories. There is always going to be a quiet kid in the room. In addition to our scholarship program, we have grants and we sponsor mentorship programs in Prince George's County. Stop going after the kid with straight A's and on honor roll. Those kids receive enough praise. The quiet kid in the informational session about student government, or the informational session about mentorship, who's not talking, those are the people that need you the most. Like, why is it that you flock to people who already have what you can't give them? I mean, what would you like to give them? More success, more opportunities, as opposed to this person that may need it more? I hate that. I hate that.
So we talk a lot about wanting certain people to be represented in the different areas that we occupy. As organizers, how do we intentionally seek their presence, or how do we be inclusive of people who are outside of our immediate communities or demographics? Do you, well, okay,
Just
more, let's see, like a hypothetical question, right? And again, this would also apply if you probably inhabited a different identity. Would you walk onto a certain street corner, approach some people and say, I have this platform that I think can really empower you? Or how would you do it?
hypothetically, let me see. Okay. Yes. Okay. There's something in New York City called source of income discrimination. So I would find out if people are experiencing that. Because what that means is that some landlords and brokers do not accept rental vouchers and things from people. It's against the law, but the city does not enforce it, and the law is not strong enough that makes it a disincentive for the people, for the landlords to do it. So I would go up to them and say, you know what, you're in this shelter now. You have this voucher. Would you like to come and how would you like to have an independent apartment? Do you realize that you're being discriminated against? Well, I can help you with this. Come with me. I can take you to someone. There's a group of us that are getting together, and this is what we're going to do, because you're not the only ones that I'm also experiencing that, because at the moment I'm on the waiting list for housing, but I had to get on a lottery. So that's how I do that for independent housing. Is that what you're talking about? Okay.
And there's no need to reinvent the wheel at all. There have been many times where I've just put up a Facebook status like, do you know anyone who is trans or anyone who is in need of X, Y, and Z? I'd like to interview them for this publication. As often as we don't want people to be the spokesperson of their race, their gender, whatever identity they have, unfortunately, that's just the reality of working in social justice. Yeah. I would rather put out a feeler than try and speak on behalf of the trans community or try and speak on behalf of the LGBTQIA community. So it's just a reality.
What Ola said also.
Okay. So I would say in my reality, I definitely would not underestimate social media. So in my experience, when real world spaces don't tend to be the most welcoming for people who are Black, trans, and XYZ, social media is that safe space. It's that it kind of provides a collectivity for people who wouldn't otherwise have it. So usually reaching out on social media tends to be very effective. People can go at their own pace. They don't feel like you cornered them if you came up to them in person, if that's something that they're worried about. So I think I used to underestimate social media. I kind of dismissed it as something that tended to be on the playful side. Like, people use social media for personal use, and that's true. But campaigning on social media just has such potential to reach people who you would have never otherwise thought of. So again, like, no need to reinvent the wheel. It's not really as out there as people think, but honestly, trusting that social media can be a way to reach out to people who aren't going to come to certain events because they don't feel like they can walk into that room for a million reasons. So I've always had a lot of success doing that. So I definitely would encourage that as an outreach mechanism, a method.
So I think the things I gathered there was, 1, intentionality, and 2, the 3 C's, which were criticize, call out, create change. Perfect. You have a question?
Yeah. What about the implicit biases of nonprofits to get the most bang for their bucks in their hiring practices? So basically, a trans person of color who did not go to college that might be a great field organizer won't get the job because they don't have at least a master's degree from Harvard University and a PhD from Yale. Talk about those implicit hiring practices that actually prohibit those people from being able
I have very strong opinions about that. So I've noticed that because I studied international relations, and all of my work, like my internships, my classes, have all revolved around things that the nonprofit sector does, and ultimately, you know, it ends up being more. It ends up being a mechanism for social stratification more than anything. So I think that kind of separating yourself from the status that those nonprofits are perpetrating, like, I don't, let me be more specific. So for example, we're here in DC, where the biggest nonprofits in the world have their headquarters, and mid-sized nonprofits have their headquarters, and they all require that you have at least a master's to do like a research assistant position, a policy research position, and things that are at the center of the organizing that we do. Like, they have the power to affect change in medicine and migrant rights and things like that. If we continue to remind ourselves that that's not where the honesty is, that's not where the work, the true value is, it doesn't matter that that master's degree is what's shutting you out. I don't want to be reductive, because I do understand the power of those research institutions and those nonprofits, but organizing groups that value personal experience as a resume in itself are more important. Like, I genuinely believe that. Like, they are stronger, they are more effective, they have wider reach, and honestly, they're more personally impactful and I think socially impactful. So, and I do agree that that implicit bias is an issue, and I've worked with nonprofits where, you know, I'm the only Black employee, and I don't like it, but I remind myself that I'm here to learn, to take away a lesson and then go back to, I don't want to say the streets in like an abstract way, but like, I'm going to go back to the groups that matter, and it really is. It's like, I want to go back to people who taught me and who built me up, because it's always been organizers that like gave me the most important lessons. Like, I learned data entry and I learned like understanding databases, but I didn't really get what mattered from that office. So I think that I was honest with myself. I was like, well, okay, like, they're going to shut out certain people, but they're not really the center of the work. So they can keep doing that, because it's really here, I guess, where we are. So I would say that it's hard, but that's my opinion.
Yeah. I guess I'll talk about my organization. If someone, if I think even if we said that they needed a master's degree, I mean, I would say that if the person came in and was qualified, say, you know, the master's degree has nothing. This person has done this, that. This person's life is their resume. I mean, that's what I would say. This person's life is their resume, because I see things like that, and I say, well, why do you need a master's in order to know how to do a direct action, to go out to how to shut shit down? I mean, you don't need a master's to do that. I mean, you don't. So I mean, and if you've done that, if you've done it effectively in order to get things changed, then having a master's degree is cute. But if you have not but if you have not done it, I mean, if you have not actually done the work, then I mean, does that kind of address what you're saying?
I'm just thinking. So in September of 2017, a group of Black individuals sent a letter to a large national organization and talked about the upward mobility of people of color within. Because essentially they had hired 2 positions of people of color, and everyone else in the organization was white. Now they say, well, we support trans, right? Like, but every trans person you end up hiring happens to be white. Every LGBT person happens to be white, and then you sprinkle in 2 or 3 Latinos.
I like that, sprinkle in, yeah.
Sprinkle them in, and that's one of the things. But now the HR department of that organization says, we've removed certain practices from our hiring procedures for certain positions that fall under this threshold. So it's internal policy measures that I was trying to see if somebody would address that need to be corrected.
This goes back to the call out thing. A few weeks ago, I sent an email and copied the VP of Development and the president of a major nonprofit fellowship program and asked them those very questions. Why is everyone in this development nonprofit fellowship white, Ivy League educated, upper class? And it was a scathing email. I said, don't take me off your email list. I figured out the leadership's email based on their email style. I said, take me off your damn listserv until you guys start changing things, because you are into this white nonprofit industrial complex. For some people, that would be a career killer. But for me, I would, let me just be frank, with all my health issues, I've survived cancer, 2 major organ transplants, and I use a wheelchair.
Go ahead.
YOLO is my life.
Go ahead.
No one. This thought that in DC is so small, someone can kill your career. No, the hell they can't. No one can kill. No one has enough power over your career than you. And I'm sure next year when they examine the program, diversity will change. And one thing I want the people of color, or the marginalized people in this room, to realize is it is not on you to tackle racism or to challenge it. It is on all the white allies in this room. Because people of color are rarely listened to when racism is brought up. So oftentimes, encourage your white counterparts to speak up. I'm going to be really brief. In terms of, I know it's impossible for me, but in terms of not getting a job because you're qualified or not getting an internship, reapply. No doesn't mean shit to me. For example, okay, the White House, the Obama White House acceptance rate was that of Harvard Law School. I applied 3 times and finally got in there. And that's that tenacity. Like, forget the qualifications. You will eventually get chose for what is for you. And the criticized part, I will not tell you guys where I work. My 9 to 5, I won't. But I'll tell you what I did. I found out that my manager hired someone for my job who legally was required to have a certification to do his job that I had. And this person was completely unqualified. This manager, my manager that hired this man, I confronted him about it. He called me an angry black woman.
Did you?
The minute he called me that, he went from managing 600 people to managing his damn self.
Oops. Oops.
It took me months to get the courage to talk to HR, to finally get tired of the abuse and expose them for what it was. And it's scary as hell. You risking your livelihood. I'm risking my ability to pay for my health insurance. I'm risking my ability to have a salary. But I'm not going to sit there. I'm so uncomfortable watching people who are unqualified get ahead just because of their gender, because they're men. So it takes a lot of courage, and you don't have to be the courageous one all the time. Just sprinkle some gossip in somebody's ear. It'll eventually get to where it needs to be. But if you don't have that courage yet, don't feel bad. Someone else can always be your ally.
Yeah.
I just wanted to comment really quickly on your question. One, the nonprofit industrial complex is very real, and I think the problem there is the fact that it is what I call a top-down strategy. You're going to pick from people who got educated at the best colleges, who grew up with families that had 6-figure salaries, who never suffered, but who want to cultivate change, which they can't be punished for, but they're at the top. It's literally the nonprofit form of trickle down, which we know doesn't work. And the problem is that are we the ones who change that? Are we the ones who change trickle down into a bottom-up, equitable, fair hiring practice? And that is where tactics such as call out, criticize would work. But again, the onus shouldn't be on us who are trying to get hired. The onus should be on those who are already hired, who are within the system, within the complex, to begin to stir that change that they are there to create. So I would say, unfortunately, it's a reality, but don't be discouraged. Change.
And don't forget to tell them, stop letting white guilt run your organization. I know you feel guilty about being wealthy or white, or privileged and white, but goddamn, how dare you, how dare you allow this to run your organization to make you feel better? That's messed up.
Especially when people are suffering. That's what you have to remember. People are suffering. And I'm speaking for myself. That's why I'm here, and I'm assuming that that's why you're here too. Otherwise, you'd be someplace else.
And get comfortable making people uncomfortable. It's the best thing in the world. I love seeing I love seeing people turn red. It's fun.
So something that I guess like I'll share from my perspective. When I was graduating college, I was really hesitant about getting into the nonprofit industry for the exact reason that you brought up. Um, that bias is very real, and the top down work is it's the nature, it's the current reality, I should say, and it is discouraging in a lot of ways. But for the months leading up to graduation, I was thinking about what kind of job I wanted. When it seemed like I was kind of the feeder, the exact candidate to go into the nonprofit industry, I would my disbelief in the industry led me to find out what else was out there, like what other avenues are there to institute change. And that was really when I understood the breadth of organizing, of community organizing, and how that is radically different from nonprofit spaces, for like radically different from the top down nature, from the majority white nature of of the organizations who do have great missions but just sometimes don't get it right when you get down to the employment part of it. So I I really think that it's up to it's not up to you to change the nonprofit industry. I would never put that on any one person, no matter their race. But I do think that it's really important to think about alternate ways of changing societies. I honestly don't believe that we can put all of our faith in nonprofits and then have them do the work, because there's so much else out there, and there's so many other avenues for changing minds before changing policy, before changing societies. And I think that's the biggest challenge as a person who cares about all these issues, is constantly realizing that the systems that exist are not the most effective, and then figuring out what are the alternates. So no matter, like, you see the profit industry and you're like, all right, I'm gonna go do the nonprofits. You go to the nonprofits and you're like, well, okay, this isn't perfect. What's next? And that's kind of where a lot of people are, is figuring out how do we pinpoint the problems, how do we critique this, and then what is next? Like, what's the better version? What's the next version? So it's not perfect, but it's a constant question, and I just really want to hammer that in, is that we keep asking. Like, none of us have the answer.
I just want to say, oh, sorry. Just want to say one thing. I know that we're all involved in nonprofits here, so we're not trapped in the hellscape. But the reason why we're here, we're looking for alternative ways to do things, whether that's research and development, whether that's expanding Medicare. We're looking for something different. And so please take all of these as words of encouragement. Question.
Yeah, could you speak, I'm from Maryland, I'm Catherine, I'm from Maryland Citizen South Initiative. Can you speak to how we make sure marginalized communities are involved in determining like what the ask is? Coming from like Baltimore, this is not necessarily specific to healthcare, but there was a big debate on sort of corporate welfare for Under Armour, and a lot of communities that were very impoverished were villainized for not holding out for a better deal, and those were communities of color, and the people that were holding out for that perfect deal are like, we're not willing to negotiate with the city, we're white and wealthy organizations. How in healthcare do we make sure that marginalized communities aren't just tokenized members of coalitions, and how do we make sure to ask is,
Did you ask them what they needed?
Yeah, so, yeah, I wasn't involved in that campaign, but yes, I mean, the real, yeah.
Okay, so that was handled by Elisa.
Well, yeah.
So what ended up occurring is that the city and the corporation of Under Armour made an agreement based off the TIFs, these public fundings for the infrastructure to a new development. They ended up just saying, oh, we're gonna give $10 million to the community association. The $10 million had to be dispersed amongst all of them in that area, which had, it's on the peninsula, so there's like a Cherry Hill district, but then you've got like Upper Fells and stuff like that, where there's like rich white kids that already have like land. So, and a new park, and Under Armour's right there. So they ended up reinvesting in the same communities that already have the money and also investing a little bit of money into the black communities across the river. And so it caused this kind of huge rift, saying that the black community should have held out for a longer group of a little bit more coin. But at the same point, they said, they've never seen money like that before. So what do? You've never seen something before?
Okay.
So like how in healthcare, turning it back to that, is single payer too big of an ask when there are populations that could benefit immediately from smaller pieces of legislation? So like how is that?
I mean, I think if you can get single payer, that would be a good ask. Is that what you're saying? I mean, I don't know the situation, but was the single payer was that the crux of the decision?
Completely
Oh,
separate.
okay. Okay.
In healthcare is that when you see a pot of money that finally comes your way and you've never seen anything before, do you accept the first deal at the table?
Okay.
Black
So is the
community.
question essentially again,
Okay.
radical change is incremental?
Yeah, and how
Okay.
do we make sure that
Okay. Thank you.
Okay. I would say hire from that community. Or if you can't hire, create an advisory board and advertise directly in those communities. And advertising is pretty easy. You can print a flyer. And that's what I keep saying. You don't have to reinvent the wheel. It always goes back to basic answers. The community is just waiting to be asked. And in terms of hiring diversely, there's this website that is the alternative to LinkedIn for people of color called Jobwell. Yeah, you'll love the website. It's JOPWELL.com. Jobwell. And they specifically are requesting resumes from they've been written about by Forbes, Fast Company, all that. Requesting resumes from people from diverse backgrounds. So that's a great place to go.
And again, ask them what they need. Ask the community what they need.
I do want to say though, in that situation, it seems like there wasn't an agreement beforehand of what people wanted. Like I don't think that question would come up if there was an agreement. If you are incorporating people from the beginning, like what is our ask, what is our timeline, what is our goal, that wouldn't come up later. So I'm just wondering, like, what is?
I can give an example on
Yeah.
how it might come up. So I work in state level legislation, and we have a broad coalition, and we truly have reach from all over the state and all different communities. But the question is, in Annapolis, it's a 3-month session, bills get pared down. I'm willing to accept something that might be a compromise. Someone else might want to hold out for a perfect bill, and someone else may have been willing to compromise far earlier to get something on the table. So, how do I ensure that if someone says, look at a disease group, say, if it impacts a specific drug, and they say, this will really help me right now, do we say, oh, I'm going to hold off for that? And how do we make sure that everyone's voices in that is heard? We may all go in with the same goal, but have different levels that we are willing to compromise. Sorry that I'm taking up.
No,
so much.
I think that's an amazing question, actually, and I'm not gonna pretend like I have an answer. I'm like 21. I'm kind of new to this. Okay, but I do think that to kind of answer that, I have never been in the camp that thought that we have to endanger more people of color's lives for like this moral, like abstract high ground. And it's always just been like, I know my values and I know my politics, and I know that I can seem very, very radical sometimes because I think I believe that, like, single payer healthcare and things like that people think is radical, and sometimes like I don't think that it is, but I understand that. But also, like, I'm not gonna be the one who decides that certain people should keep suffering. You know what I mean? Like, I think that's a really good question, and it's more of a ongoing discussion. But I will say that I have never been okay with saying, like, okay, like, just because I want to be able to later on say that we held out, that I'm willing to put people's livelihoods at risk. That's just never been my belief. So I think it's kind of on a case to case, which is why I think that coalitions decide that for themselves. And I think that when there are people of color in that conversation, this is what happens. Like, they are willing to accept something that a certain other person might consider a lower payout. And to that, I would say, like, okay, we keep working and we do something else and we change a structure that gives small time handouts instead of large scale change. So I wouldn't guilt anybody for taking a payout that would still impact their community. I think that's a level of it's a superiority complex that you get to have when you have privilege. So that's how I see it. Yeah.
In the suffering.
Like, I don't think people should be suffering.
Now.
Period.
You deal with the perfect later, but in the suffering now, because the people are suffering.
All right, y'all. So we got 1 minute left, right? I'm gonna challenge you. We just talked a lot about how to make our movements inclusive, how to make them strong, how to make sure that they're recovering all this ground, right? It sounds like a lot of work. I don't really want to do it. So I'm gonna give one of y'all, one of you needs to tell me why. How does this benefit me? Why should I do this? Just one person, because we got 1 minute. Y'all don't know? Y'all don't know?
It benefits me because I don't want to see people suffer anymore.
All right, that's it. That is the tea on that.
Can we get another round of applause for this panel?